I'll use Active Directory with Office 365. So if you've been to either my talk on identity or Jono's on DirSync, we're going to sort of focus at this talk really about how does it look from an AD perspective. How do I get my AD ready so that when I move to the cloud, everything works? And we're also going to talk a little bit in detail about what happens with directory sync and AD and those sorts of components. So without further ado. So as I said, we're going to get through the requirements. We'll look at DirSync and ADFS. So you probably saw this picture, and I changed the title of it, but what we really are talking about here is AD integration, okay? So we've talked about identity and we've talked about directory sync, and they're kind of two parts of the puzzle that actually make up how I actually take an AD and how I move that up to the cloud, right? So when I add directory synchronization, I start synchronizing the objects from on-premise up to the cloud, and this is my beautiful animation, right? So I start moving users, groups, contacts up to the cloud. When I add ADFS to it, I effectively move my IDP in from the cloud to on-premise, okay? So really, it's sort of this sort of stepping stone, if you will, that we step through. We start with AD on-premise, we add directory sync to get the objects up into the cloud, and you need directory sync to get them there, and then we add ADFS to get the sign-in. And it's important that we have both. They don't work independent of each other. So ADFS by itself will not synchronize your accounts to the cloud, okay? You do need both. So why do you do this? Why would you go ahead and try and integrate your on-premise AD to the cloud? There's a couple of reasons. Firstly, around user management. So it's a single place for user management, or object management, you could say. It also a single place to monitor the password or manage the password, and the policies assigned to a password. So an online identity, for example, has a pretty restrictive set of features. It can't have spaces, it can't have double quotes, it's 8 to 16 characters. And a lot of people say, well, I don't like that. That's too short. I need it to be more complex. We want to use a passphrase. You can do that with ADFS by allowing you to set that password policy on premise and not have to worry about the cloud. So those things give us what we call enterprise single sign-on. And single sign-on is a overloaded term, but in this case we're really talking about use your corporate credentials to access cloud-based services. There's also support for what we call hybrid scenarios. So a hybrid scenario, predominantly around Exchange Online, having the ability to have mailboxes on premise, mailboxes in the cloud, and be able to move mailboxes back and forth, ensure that you get all the free busy integration, as well as a rich experience around management, mail flow, and management of that environment. And then there's strong auth options. Okay, so two-factor auth, RSA, those types of things are only available if you have ADFS integrated into AD. Okay. So let's just sort of, if you've got AD on premise, what do I actually need? And it's not quite a straightforward answer. In this case, Active Directory forest functionality level, okay, must be 2003, native, okay? If you've got Windows 2000 or a mix, you need to get to 2003, okay? For Windows, to install ADFS 2.0, you're going to need Windows 2008 or above, okay? It comes with R2, the license, right? Or does it come with 2008? The license.
It's just Windows Server.
Okay, part of the Windows Server Cal. There you go. And don't laugh at me when I say this, for directory sync you need Windows 2003 as an operating system or above, but only the 32-bit version is supported. We are working to fix that, but right now it's 32-bit. And we do support virtualization for all of those, so you can virtualize both. Again, when you virtualize, you need to consider that it does have a performance impact. And today we support a single forest. You can have multiple domains in a single forest, but it must be a single forest. And we sync the entire forest. Okay. We are working towards multi-domain support, but it's going to be a little bit further out. We should have a roadmap sometime after GA, which will provide a bit more detail. And then, as I said before, hybrid deployments. If you want a hybrid deployment, you need an Exchange 2010 SP1 CAS. And the reason I mention it here is not that you need that server, it's more that you need that schema extension installed. Okay? So your Active Directory must have that schema extension applied. So AD naming versus UPN suffix. So I can have an AD, my Active Directory could be called contoso.com, and my UPN suffix could be fabricam.com. Okay, they can vary against each other. They need not match. All right, but there's a number of different, what I call different structures of the way that we can name Active Directory. Okay, so the most common, or maybe not the most common, but the easiest one to deal with is what I call a publicly routable name. So this is a name that you can prove you own on the internet. Something contoso.com is publicly routable. You can define a DNS entry for it. You can prove ownership. Very simple model. Okay. You can also use subdomains. So there's some recommendations that Microsoft had previously around using something like corp.contoso.com is the name of your AD. Using that for your UPN suffix is okay as well. All right. Then what we get to, and I'll ask, has anybody got a private labeled domain, something like contoso.local or something in that environment? Okay. Do you use smart cards at all with those? We should talk later. So private domains are going to be a problem for us as far as UPN suffix go. All right. And the reason is you can't ever prove you own the domain to the cloud. Okay. So Office 365 requires that you prove you own the domain through DNS entries, and contoso.local is not going to work for us. Now, you don't have to rename your domain, but you do need to move to your UPN suffix, and you can do that with either using alternative UPN suffixes or directly editing them to set them to be something else that is publicly routable. So in this case, you might choose a primary SMTP as the UPN suffix. Problem, smart cards are generally based off UPN suffix. Okay, so you may have to reissue them. So unfortunately, smart cards have one downfall of that. And then we have what we call single level domains or SLDs. Does anybody run an SLD? Okay, yeah, we got some problems there. We should talk a bit later. So currently, single level domains, we've done very limited testing with it. Okay, again, it can't be used for UPN suffix. Right now, we know that there are certain problems that will come up with it. So it's not currently on the supported list, but we can talk to you a bit more offline about it.
I think that I misunderstood the single level domain.
Okay.
You have one forest, one domain.
Oh, okay. No, that's different. So an SLD would be something like Contoso with no .com on the end of it. All right. So whatever your domain structure is, if you fall into one of the top two categories, you can use it for your UPN suffix. If you don't fall in the top two, you must choose something else, as I said. And the reason is we do this for realm discovery. Okay. So the domain portion of your UPN is how we figure out what type of authentication you've got, where your ADFS server is, you know, if you've got that set up or not. Okay. As I said, prove ownership, and it doesn't match, doesn't need to match. It does have to be less than 48 characters, though. We have some interesting restrictions. 48 characters for domain name. Anything longer is too long. So if you're longer than 48, you have to shorten it. Just a nuance of the system. So as far as UPNs go, once you've actually chosen the suffix, so you've chosen, I'm going to use contoso.com or corp.contoso.com, and they're fine, and they need not match your SMTP address. This is kind of how we go about validating that through. So generally we say all users should have a defined UPN. They don't have to have a defined UPN, but it makes it so much easier and more predictable if they do. All right. If you don't have a defined UPN, there's a couple of things that we try and do. We try and make it up. All right. So we're going to say, hey, for enterprise single sign-on, you've got a federated domain, users syncing into it. We're going to take the SAM account name and tack the domain name onto the end of it. Okay. And we're going to try and make up the value. Okay. Now that works in most cases, but it can be non-deterministic. Okay. For cloud-based identities, if you don't have a UPN defined, we're going to call them mail nickname at whatever your company is, .onmicrosoft.com. And this .onmicrosoft.com is this trial domain that we give you. So if you've signed up for the beta, you would have got something.onmicrosoft.com. All right. So we do some slightly different things depending on what type of domain you're running on. So UPNs, again, have a bunch of restrictions, and this UPN restrictions on characters will be applied to SAM account name if you don't have a defined UPN. Okay? So in this case, we only accept letters, numbers, dot, dash, and underscore. Okay? And you can't have a dot before the @ symbol. So you can have ross.adams, right? That's all fine, but you can't have ross.adams.junior.@contoso.com. That last dot becomes a problem. All right? And the username can't be longer than 64 characters. Yes, it's usually that case. Junior dot. Yeah. So that's why that's the example I've seen, you know, or the third dot. I don't know. Yeah. So and it can't be longer than 64 characters. So UPN in total is 113. 48 plus 64 plus the @ symbol, 113. And you can't be against a non-validated domain. So if you are local, this goes back to the point before, it must go through. There is a tool that we will have, and I believe it's already up on the community site, that allows you to verify basically these character restrictions. And it applies these character restrictions to UPNs that are defined, SAM account name, and mail nickname. Okay, so it applies them to all three attributes. Now, technically, it's only on UPN if it's defined, but it will apply them across all three and tell you whether you have any of these problems. Also, users that don't have a UPN, you know, $signs, ampersands, hashes, carets, you know, all of these things that aren't allowed. So this tool is really useful if you want to figure out how does my Active Directory look now, and will it move to the cloud smoothly or not. All right? And your best bet is to try and fix it before you move it, rather than move it and try and fix later. Okay? So a little bit of a deep dive on online directory synchronization. Jono's going to keep me honest, so I run through this. So basically, there's a couple of options here for directory sync. The first option, the most common option, is just a one-way sync. Okay, so a one-way sync provisions users, DLs, security groups, and contacts up to the cloud. It takes about 60-odd properties with it, depending on the object as it runs through. And you can move to two-way sync later. Okay, so you can start with one-way and then decide, hey, I really want this hybrid stuff, so I'm going to move to two-way sync later. And on-premise becomes the master of all these objects. So you can't actually go to the cloud and modify things. You must do it on-premise. There's no sort of mix and match here. Okay? So things like proxy addresses are mastered on-premise as opposed to in the cloud. All right. You can move to a two-way sync. So why would I do a two-way sync? And this way, I do this for these hybrid deployments. If I really want a true hybrid experience where I want to be able to move mailboxes from the cloud back to on-premise, then I'm going to need to have a two-way sync. Okay?